Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World Talks. Kyiv and Washington have agreed a plan for a 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine. Outcome of negotiations, regarded by Americans as a sign of a goodwill, resulted in the US resuming military deliveries to Ukraine as well as sharing vital intelligence on Russia. As the US delegation is to discuss the ceasefire with Moscow any moment now, peace seems closer than ever before. And to talk about it, we're joined by Sergiy Gerasymchuk, Deputy Executive Director at the Foreign Policy Council, Ukrainian Prism. And good evening.
Good evening.
Now, before we start our discussion, I'd like us first to listen to Donald Trump's remarks on the progress of the peace process.
We had a great success yesterday. We have a full ceasefire if it kicks in. We have to see. It's up to Russia now. But we've had a good relationship with both parties, actually. And we'll see. We'll be knowing people are going to Russia right now as we speak. And hopefully we can get a ceasefire from Russia. And if we do, I think that would be 80% of the way to getting this horrible bloodbath finished. It's a bloodbath is taking place over there. We haven't spoken to him yet with substance because we just found out and we just were able to get Ukraine to agree. So we're going to know very soon. I've gotten some positive messages, but a positive message means nothing. This is a very serious situation. This is a situation that could lead to World War III. And Biden should have never let it happen. We've gotten half of it as a ceasefire. And if we can get Russia to stop, then we have a full ceasefire. And I think it'll never go back to war. In a financial sense, yeah, we could do things very bad for Russia. It would be devastating for Russia, but I don't want to do that because I want to see peace.
So Russia sends some positive signals, but a positive message means nothing, says Donald Trump. Now, what should we expect from the US-Russian negotiations, in your opinion?
Well, first, it's very nice that Russia is sending very good messages, but at the same time, it is still sending drones and missiles. Yesterday, there was a drone attack on Kyiv and missile attack on Odessa. So messages together with drones and missiles, it's something that Russia sends to Ukraine all the time. Speaking about the perspectives, first and foremost, definitely ceasefire is something that Ukraine would be interested in. However, there are a lot of questions to be fixed still. First, it's verification of ceasefire, because we all know that for dozens of times Russia was signing ceasefire agreements, but they never lasted for longer than a couple of days. So we need to have a clear mechanism of verification, and of course it would have been easier if we monitored only airspace and the Black Sea. It will be quite more difficult, bearing in mind a long front line. But anyway, we do hope that some verification mechanism would exist. Another question is the question of Kursk Oblast. As far as I'm concerned,
now before we talk about the Kursk region, I'll still like to ask you, who, in your opinion, will profit more from the 30-day ceasefire if such a deal is struck indeed? Because, well, what makes us shouldn't we believe that Russia will simply use this time to regroup and prepare a, even bigger offensive against Ukraine soon?
Well, of course, Ukraine would benefit from ceasefire if it's supplemented with some security guarantees, and if it is supplemented with some guarantees that ceasefire will last. But we do not have such guarantees yet. Hopefully, President Trump will manage to persuade Putin somehow by pressure, by additional arguments to make it sustainable. But there are strong doubts about sustainability of this ceasefire. And definitely without security guarantees, without American engagement, without boots on ground, without verification mechanism, I suppose that Russia can use it just as a pretext for further planning of operations against Ukraine.
Now, how is Ukraine reacting to the outcome of yesterday's talks in Jeddah? Saudi Arabia. Well, I'm obviously talking about more arms deliveries being delivered to Ukraine, and about sharing of the intelligence on Russia.
Definitely, that's a relief, because most of Ukrainians, both civilians and military personnel, were shocked with the cuts in access to the American information and delays in delivery of weapons and ammunition. Now there is a certain relief, but again, we need some sustainability, and there is a definite need to know that the deliveries will continue, and that there is a good will of President Trump to continue the policy of support of Ukraine. We all know about all these doubts raising in the European Union regarding the American possible withdrawal from the EU. And in such a case, definitely Ukraine, the EU countries, the United Kingdom, Norway, and probably Turkey should think about closer and deeper cooperation in the security field, to find some sort of substitute to the United States if they decide to withdraw from the European continent and to switch their attention to the Indian Pacific region.
Mm. Now, it seems that Ukraine has lost most of the Kursk region. It has occupied since last year. Now, how much can it worsen Kyiv's negotiating position?
Well, the point is that if we had ceasefire immediately, as it was mentioned in the memorandum voiced in Jeddah, then Ukraine would remain in Kursk Oblast. That's something that Putin can hardly accept. And that's why Russian army is pushing hard to achieve the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from Kursk Oblast. Of course, Ukraine was expecting to use it as a bargaining chip at the negotiations, because we have Russians in our territories, in territories of 4 oblasts, which Russia already claimed to be the part of their territory, but also in Kharkiv Oblast. And of course, we could negotiate the exchange of territories. Now Russia wants to prevent such a scenario. And Russia takes time to prevent such scenario, because I've already heard that there were messages from Moscow that the meeting with President Trump can be possible only by Easter, which means in a month, which means Russia will have plenty of time to focus all their attention on Kursk Oblast and on getting rid of Ukrainian troops there.
Would you say then that the whole operation is a failure and an unnecessary loss of lives?
Well, I wouldn't say that it's a failure, because symbolically it had a very significant impact on the perception of Ukrainian army and Ukrainian capacities, because Ukraine managed to show that it can be not only in a defensive position, losing its territory, but it can also organize some proactive operations. But of course, if we measure it by human lives, every human life matters. And of course, if it will be weighed just because of the political will of some global actors, then it will be a great pity.
Now, before the Jeddah negotiations, the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated that Ukraine will probably not get all of its land back from Russia, and Donald Trump also remarked today that he is discussing land with the Russians. So, what do you think Russians can give Ukraine back if they have already repeatedly stated that they will not give anything back?
I assume that at the moment, bearing in mind the global context, the relations between Moscow and Washington and the European Union's frustration, the feasible scenario will be ceasefire at the current front line, which wouldn't mean that Ukraine accepts annexation of its territories, but also wouldn't mean that Russia will give up any formal territories included into their constitution, which basically means, to make a long story short, a status quo on the front line with ceasefire more or less successful and further freezing the conflict unless Russia gets more power to conclude, if it is not stopped by the initiatives of the European Union and other Western democratic powers.
Donald Trump has claimed that only he knows Russia's weakness ahead of negotiations. Would you care to guess, or maybe you know, what's Russia's weakness that Donald Trump knows about?
Well, I wish I knew what Donald Trump knows, but my assumption is that the key weakness right now is Russian economics, which suffered a lot from sanctions and which faces further problems. And that's why I think that Putin might be interested in ceasefire, because he knows that the longer he is involved in this non-stop war, the more vulnerable is his economic system. But if he makes a break and if sanctions further are lifted, then it's a relief for Russian Federation and a chance for them to gain more.
Right. Donald Trump stated, quote, "There are things you can do that wouldn't be pleasant in a financial sense. I can do things financially. It would be very bad for Russia. I don't want to do that because I want to get peace." Now, wouldn't that eventually mean a, return to the previous administration's policy, something that Donald Trump has criticized widely?
Well, I wouldn't say that Mr. Trump will ever agree on such a statement. But on the other hand, if there are no other options, I wouldn't exclude that under the other name, like not Biden's politics, but new Trump's politics, it might become a reality. Because if we have a status quo, then probably the only option is to preserve the existing mechanism of preventing Russia's further assertiveness. But that's a sad story for Ukraine, because every day we are losing lives of our people, and every day we are losing the chances to improve our lives, and every day we are losing our prospects of further development, and that's a tragedy, and we have to admit it.
Sergiy Gerasymchuk, Deputy Executive Director at the Foreign Policy Council, Ukrainian Prism, who was our guest tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching, and that will be all for now. Stay with us for much more here on TVP World.